Welcome to this session. I'm Fiona Strens. I'm at the University of Lincoln, and I've previously had a career in defence security across government, industry and entrepreneurship. I've got a great panel here today, a lot of diversity, experience, very distinguished. We'll start off with Rupert. Rupert Jones, some of you may know him. He's had a distinguished military career and led many operational campaigns and now has a portfolio career, I think, Rupert.
Indeed. Good morning, everyone.
Next is Will. Will Blyth, co-founder, CEO of Arendite, which is a defence AI company, has previously worked for Helsing and Palantir and has an army background. Keith Deere, sometimes labelled Fujitsu, sometimes Kasai, lots of experience, including as an RAF intelligence officer in his background. Next, it's Elke, Professor Elke Schwarz from Queen Mary University, who's going to keep us on the straight and narrow on ethics, I think, Elke. And then finally, last but not least, Henry Gates from Helsing. Thank you, Henry. Henry's standing in for Marcel, who may be in the programme. Thank you, Henry, for doing that at short notice. Okay, so the topic of this panel is the future of warfare in the AI age. I think it would be useful for us just to know how many people work in or around defence in this room. Okay, so there's a smattering rather than a majority, I would say. So we will bear that in mind because this is a discussion topic that evolves and is changing all the time, and this is an opportunity, therefore, for some of you who are in that area, hopefully to get a little bit of added insight. But for those of you who aren't, we'll try and make sure we help raise awareness of some of the key issues. We're not going to do lots of preamble and lots of introductions. People can bring their career experience into this as we go. We had a pre-meet and decided we're not going to dodge difficult issues or questions. We'll try and make this a bit sparky and provocative, so panellists, feel free to do that. And I also have the panel members' permission to kind of cut them off and keep this moving, so I will exercise that right. We'll start with the first half with some kind of big questions of the role of AI and strategy and so on, and we'll move on in the second half to a bit more around sort of innovation and some of the practicality. So you'll hear more from some panellists in the early part and the latter part. Don't worry about that. We'll try and mix it up a bit. Finally, there is Q&A at the end of this session, and that's being done through Slido. I think the team will put the Slido QR code up here shortly, so please feel free to draft some nice, short, crunchy questions as we go through this. That's enough, I think, by the way of introduction. So the role of AI in modern warfare. When people think about AI in warfare, I know some of you will be immediately in science fiction world and jumping to killer robots on the front line. Others of you maybe on the AI community might be thinking more about back office productivity and that kind of thing. But actually, this is really, really complicated. And one of the reasons it's complicated is that modern warfare is complicated. You know, we used to fight conflicts with well-defined enemies and in well-defined domains. And nowadays, warfare, conflict plays out in cyberspace, in space, in the media, in the economy, as well as on the battlefield. And we're often fighting very loose proxy organizations, loose coalitions, and so on. So it's a very sort of muddy context, if you like, in which to be successful. And that means that strategic and operational kind of methods and doctrine has had to evolve. Okay, so given all of that context, my first question to the panel is, where do you think the most important, most high potential uses of AI are in this modern battlefield? And I'm going to start, because you've got so much military operational experience, Rupert, with you, if I may.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I mean, I suppose the true answer to your question is, in a way, is in the back office. But in a way, that's not what we're here to talk about today. But defence organisations are hugely expensive enterprises, and a lot of their money gets absorbed in the back office, and there's potentially huge gains that AI can offer in the back office that can release funds efficiency for the front line. But I think as it pertains to this, it is around, and kind of focus on my background, it is around ultimately decision making. So to your proposition that warfare's got more complicated, victory, success is harder to define, I think it is around how you allow commanders, decision makers to understand what's going on and make the best decisions possible and the fastest decisions possible. Because to those who are not familiar with defence, it really is a race. You're racing your adversary to make better, quicker decisions than they can. And if they make faster decisions than you, even if they're not perfect decisions, they will probably begin to gain the momentum.
Thank you. Will, would you like to?
Yeah, I think, the way I think about this is that there's a few different categories of where AI can make a big difference. It's the back office side, which is perhaps less relevant for this conversation, but is extremely important, I can assure you, for many of the organisations and big institutions and ministries of defence to find those efficiencies they need. And then there's the operational planning side of things, and there's a branch of that which is quite proximate to making lethal decisions and targeting decisions, and which tends to be the area for the most controversy, perhaps, and a big area for us to discuss on the panel. And then the final sort of bucket, as it were, is AI that operates on the edge on platforms, and that these can be autonomous systems, or they can be platforms that have crews in them, that are crewed systems. So there's areas that AI can play a role in all of those, and some of them most slightly overlap. But each one of them basically brings quite critical sort of scaling challenges. So and the scaling challenges are things like how do you connect up these systems, because increasingly there's the blend of systems is growing. It's growing quite quickly. How can you control them in a way that's flexible to be able to swap in systems in and out when the new systems are coming online? And then most critically, I think, is how do you maintain genuine, meaningful human control that's appropriate for the context that of the decisions you're trying to make, and that comes with a range of scaling challenges as well.
Okay, thank you. Keith, I'll come to you.
Oh, okay. So I think in answering your question, AI has two problems. It has the turkey problem, first of all, and the everyone but us problem. So the turkey problem is if you're in AI commercially, you're almost always trying to sell Christmas to turkeys. Because what AI now enables you to do is imagine and test alternative futures. The ability to imagine and test alternative futures is the fundamental defining feature of human cognition that separates us from animals. It will be decision-making all the way down. And on current AI progress, you don't have to believe in science fiction to believe we're going to get to AGI. You just have to believe in straight lines on graphs. That's where we're getting to. The median estimate for when we get to artificial general intelligence, one that outperforms all of us in all cognitive tasks, is currently 2026 on the world's largest crowdsourced forecasting platform, Metaculus. So if that's true, the answer is it's going to replace you in whatever role you function in. The everyone but us problem is something that Richard and Daniel Susskind described, I think, back in 2016 in their book on AI and the professions. And they said that the problem they have is that when you go into a profession, they're almost always willing to admit that AI is going to completely revolutionise every other field but theirs. So doctors are willing to say, it's going to change the law. Lawyers are willing to say it's going to change medical practice, and on and on. And I think you see that in militaries all the time. Like from strategic decision-making to the lowest tactical decision, there will be no human in the loop if AI can outperform us in cognitive functions. And the median estimate for when we get there is 2026.
There you go. I told you it would be a little bit provocative, but I mean, this is not just a view held by Keith. These are, arguments that are playing right now, just down the road in Whitehall. A load of civil servants and military people are sitting in rooms working out how on earth they dot the I's and cross the T's on a strategic defence review, which is supposed to create some clarity around all this. So I'm going to come down the other end of the panel and try and open this up a little bit to how we deal with some of those broader challenges around, we talked about decision-making, autonomy, at the edge, and how potentially fast and almost out of our control this introduction of AI into warfare is going to become. Some fall back, I think, on this idea that as long as you've got a human in the loop, everything's going to be fine when it comes to legality and ethics and proportionality and that sort of rule of war that we've, lived with for a number of years. But actually, we know AI is a little bit different. We know it changes things. We know it increases pace. We know it drives towards automation. It reduces some of the assumptions around clear human accountability. So Just thinking about that, how do we deal with this? How do we find a balance? And maybe, give us some sort of nuanced insights to that end. But then I'm going to ask this question so the others can have a think of it. If I was to say to you on a scale of kind of from this end, which is just proceed with absolute extreme caution because this is really dangerous and difficult, to the other end of the spectrum, which is we've got to go as fast as we can, otherwise we're going to lose. Where do you sit on that spectrum? So maybe Elke, if you can start, and then we'll go down to Henry.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm a lot less optimistic about the prospects of AGI than you are, perhaps. And I see a lot more challenges arising with artificial intelligence in the near future. I'm very pleased to hear that actually the back office was mentioned. I think AI is going to be most useful for those kinds of tasks because we have the greatest challenges in all the other kinds of tasks. So with decision making, for example, you would need to have enormously robust and reliable and always up-to-date data in order to replace the capabilities and cognitive capacities of a human decision maker. And I always see a sort of a tension there, right? So on one hand, we say, well, we need to have meaningful human control at all points and all edges of using these kinds of systems. But ultimately, the raison d'être, as Keith was saying, for these systems is to take the human further out of the loop. So there's always a tension. And the reason the human is taken further out of the loop is because the logic of the system doesn't really cohere that well with the cognitive logic of how we as humans process data. So it is mostly about speed, and so there's a few ways in which our cognitive abilities cannot necessarily keep up with AI cognition. So then we're always running into this tension between wanting to meaningfully control the systems, but also not be able to. And there's a long literature that attests to the fact that we have, in relation to especially computational machines, a certain automation bias, that we are more likely to trust the machine decision, that we have less time to overrule, that we cannot form a full mental picture in time in order to make a human decision ultimately as we are embedded into digital systems. And those are the kinds of tensions that I don't see going away anytime soon. They're kind of intractable problems. And that takes us to ethics and the question of what do we do with ethical decisions when the human is taken out of that loop. Mm-hmm.
So I read into that, Elke, that you're probably towards the cautious end on the how to, yes.
Very much so. And I think it is really important to remain cautious because nobody wants a runaway kind of development. And I do understand that there might be perhaps some competing interests amongst those that have an interest in rolling out more and more of these systems. And of course, the more AI you have in the mix, the better they work. Right. But the human element, especially in warfare, will always be there.
Okay. Henry, down at your end, how do you see this?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really important question. I think first to say, so why would we want to move fast on this? Because ultimately, more weapons in the world potentially destabilizes the world, not a good thing. I mean, there are two reasons that people kind of usually talk about for moving fast. One is if we don't move fast, we're going to fall behind, become less secure. Other nefarious adversaries will move faster than us, and the world will be destabilized. The other reason why people suggest we should move fast is because somehow war with greater AI will somehow be better than war without AI. There'll be more precise weapons. Potentially there'll be better deterrent in the same way that we have nuclear weapons as a deterrent to nuclear war. Potentially AI provides a route towards conventional deterrence that reduces the amount of conflict. Those are two arguments. But I think one thing doesn't go away, and that is the need to regulate globally to ensure that some of the worst weapons that are uncontrollable are not proliferated around the world. And there are some great conversations going at a global level to ensure that doesn't happen. On your scale, though, Fiona, I would say that I don't think it's an either-or on this one. I think in order for us to really, really assure and make sure that we have the right protections and human oversight over these capabilities, we have to move quickly. We have to move quickly because we have to be able to understand what these capabilities can do. We need to understand how they can be developed and assured. And we need to earn a seat at the table. Because if we are just a country that doesn't have any of these weapons but has a great voice and how they should be regulated, then people aren't really going to listen to us. And the final thing I'd say on this is when we talk about human oversight, I think we need to be clear about, we're kind of talking about three levels of oversight. The first level is around the use of the AI, making sure that the delegation rights to AI is controllable, so that there's a human in the loop or human on the loop or whatever it is, but that is very much part and parcel of how that weapon is used. But then there are two other levels. There's a level of monitoring the AI's performance to make sure that the AI is not starting to perform in unexpected ways. We're not seeing misalignment or we're not seeing drift, and we're triggering the retraining appropriately to make sure that model stays consistent and is continuously assured and doing what it is we want it to do. And that's at a model, but also a system level. And then the third area of human control is in the development of the AI itself. We need to make sure that we have humans in full control of how these AI systems are being developed, and we're not delegating that to autonomous methodologies.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to come back down. Has anyone got a counter view on this or wants to add?
Well, it won't be a surprise given how I started that I not so much a counter view, but a third way of looking at it. I think it doesn't change things, is the first thing I would say. I was an Air Force targeteer. For a target to be justified under the law of armed conflict, it has to be positively identified, has to be necessary, in relation to the campaign, it has to be proportionate, it has to be humane, so no uncontrolled effects, and it has to be lawful. All of those things are tests that you could apply to an AI in the same way that we apply them to a soldier, a sailor, or an airman or woman serving on the front line. So when you delegate authority, it just has to outperform us on those things. And if it does outperform us in those roles, like you can baseline and benchmark that, if it does outperform us, it becomes unethical not to delegate authority to the machine that has a lower false positive or a lower false negative in making those decisions than us. The other thing AI exposes is how fuzzy our logic is, particularly in targeting. Targeting is a mixture of deontological and consequentialist ethics. So the absolute principle and judging an action on the validity by the consequences that it causes. Those two things are often in acute tension, irresolvable tension, and what we offer in a court of law is a post hoc rationalisation for the decision. So I think that there will be an occasion on which we are, I said this in evidence to the House of Lords, that we will be forced to delegate more authority to a machine because we'll be able to prove that it has a lower false positive and no lower false negative, and we will be sued by someone whose child is killed by a system when you can prove statistically it was much less likely they would have been were it a human in the loop. And therefore humans, I don't think humans will be on the loop either, because the speed of warfare, much like the speed of trading on the stock exchange now, is such that they do have a safety net for fat finger error, i.e. human error, not the AI error.
Yep.
And it's 0.02 seconds. It's faster than a camera splash, and it's an AI watching the AI. Yeah. You may have humans before the loop, but the idea that as warfare speeds up and we get to AGI, there will be somebody in the loop, I think is for the birds. It'd be a choice to lose.
Okay, any views from?
Yeah, I think for me these conversations often come back to trust, and I think the defence industry is in many ways, which might be a bizarre comment for some of you in the audience, but I think I do see it as an industry that should be built on trust, and when there's an absence of trust, things tend to go wrong. There's absolutely enormous capital programs being delivered in defence, and there's a reason you have primes, these big organisations delivering on these things. They're trusted to deliver and to take on this risk, and I think there's one of the reasons I think that there's a bit of suspicion around this whole area for people who, both in defence and outside, is that I don't think the industry has done a great job at giving people a sense that these systems are being built in a way that is worthy of that trust, and that's on us, I think, to do better at both building the systems in a way that enables people to use them in a way that's worthy of that trust, but then also to explain it. And I think there's a whole series of problems with that. I think it's quite an easy out, I think, for a company or for someone who works in the defence technology industry to take basically a kind of instrumentalist approach, where you're sort of saying, oh well, I build a tool and it's up to the person and how they want to use the tool, and it's just a tool. It's like, well, okay, but there's all sorts of design decisions about how you put tools together that have an enormous impact on the way humans interact with them. And I think we owe it to this conversation to view ourselves as very important actors in building this increasingly complex web of tools and people and AI. And that there's a sort of ethical character to the way you go about doing that. So an example from, I suppose, like a firearms example might be something like, you can design a rifle to make it easier to take the safety catch off than it is to put it on. Something like that might be an example. There might be very good reasons why you might want to do that, by the way, but still, it's a choice. It's a design choice. And I think what's really interesting about this whole area, especially on the decision support side, is that it's becoming increasingly important to make sure that you're being incredibly mindful in the way you're designing that overall system, because as it becomes more complicated.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us on to a slightly adjacent theme. But I mean, a lot of this conversation so far has assumed that we are thinking about the use of AI in conflicts at the front line and so on. And actually, of course, the speed at which we do or don't, and the way in which we do or don't adopt AI, defines our defence posture in the world. And defence posture is something that's really important when it comes to the concept of deterrence. I mean, many of you, well, everyone will understand that there's a reason we have a nuclear deterrent. It deters. Now, as we enter this new world, I'd be really interested in what you think as a nation or as an allied group of nations we should be doing to position ourselves as a sort of AI power of some form to create a deterrent effect so that we don't actually have to worry quite so much about conflict breaking out in the first place. Rupert, do you have a view on AI as a deterrence effect?
Yeah, I mean, AI is an exceptionally powerful tool in the military arsenal to ensure your deterrence is as deterring as possible. If you look at the Middle East and Ukraine, we're seeing a window into what AI can potentially do in warfare. When you're not at war, we may be in some kind of conflict, but we're not at war, it is harder to move at the pace that the Ukrainians, for example, have been moving at. Here in the UK, we have, for a whole host of reasons, underinvested in our armed forces for, call it, 15 to 20 years, and we're now paying a significant price for that the current Defence Review is trying to wrestle with. There isn't going to be a huge amount of new money, so you've got to be as smart as possible with the money that you have got, which is why we have the kind of back office, front office conversation. And we need to make our force as potent as possible. The more potent the force, the more deterrent effect you get. If AI is a fundamental element of that deterrence, then all to the good. My old friend, who's now head of the British Army, Rowley Walker, as many of you will know, his narrative is around making the British Army twice as lethal inside of 2 or 3 years. That's because he knows he's not going to get more tanks and guns. So he's got to make the tanks and guns he's got more effective. If they're more effective, he gets more deterrent effect. And what's behind his narrative is around digital, it is around AI. One last thing to say, because I think Keith's position is a really interesting one. I think it's a really interesting conversation to have. But in the here and now, big organisations, and UK Defence is just one big organisation, have got a hell of a long way to go before they're in a data position to really exploit AI. So IBM, where I do quite a lot of work, their research would say that enterprises, on average, across the world, have only put 1% of their data into large language models so far. So and defence won't even be at 1%. If less than 1% of its data is in a large language model, you've still got a very long way before you get that deterrent effect.
Okay, hold that thought, because I do want to come back to the sort of practicalities next of actually making this stuff happen, and data is obviously a key part of it. But just to finish the deterrence conversation, does anyone else want to offer a view about what a nation does to use AI as a deterrent force?
I will say something about how not to just put all your eggs in the AI basket to deter war, because ultimately what we're talking about is to deter war, right? To not have a conflict. And in order to do so, I think it is equally important to invest in human capabilities for dialogue, for trust amongst one another. And I see that becomes a little bit eroded in the conversation of prioritizing artificial intelligence for all aspects, including decision-making in warfare, because it ultimately has always been the case that our technologies, the more we come to rely on them, the more they shape our perspectives about us and about others as well. And with AI, any kind of digital system, it is even more so, because other than, let's say, a rifle or a tank or a hammer, they're not aiding in as a prosthetic, as physical prosthetic, but also as a mental kind of substitute, if you will. So we are very deeply enmeshed. So what is the logic of all of that? Well, an AI system sees other humans as objects, necessarily, right? Just edges and traces. So implicit then is an objectification. That is problematic if we want to establish relationships. So I think really thinking about what we're careening towards or what we're building is important, and perhaps shifting around and saying, okay, what do we need to develop human skills to better fight or to deter war, I think is equally important. Yeah. Just to bring in another edge here.
And I mean, to build on that slightly, I mean, some people take this debate right down to education, skills, industrial base, sovereignty, concepts like that as well, rather than just thinking about AI as a technology that can be deployed. But Keith?
Yeah, I mean, how many eggs does UK Defence have in the AI basket? Our digital spend is pitifully small. DeepMind spends Google spends 400 million on DeepMind. That's a rounding error in the defence budget. It's nothing compared to what we're spending on fast jets, carriers, you name whichever piece of totemic equipment. So one of the things I always say is if you're not betting on AI, you're betting against it. UK Defence is currently betting against AI, playing a major role in deterrence, and that's a problem. Far from putting too many eggs in the basket, we have almost none. The other thing I would say is if you think through logically where AI is going, the constant progress we get, happy to talk through some of those numbers, the straight lines on graphs, where we're headed, I would suggest that if you use like ChatGPT at the subscriber level or Claude or whatever, it's probably already better than you at almost everything you might ask it to do. It probably gives you better answers than you can come up with across most topics. I would suggest that's true now, not like some futuristic thing. And we have currently the worst AI we're ever going to have. Think through logically what it means to have a system that is smarter than almost all of us, and then think through what that means when we're talking about grand strategic decision-making, deterrence. Like, it means that the smartest country wins. It means, like, that's the maneuverist approach. That's what we do with lethality, is try to outthink rather than simply overpower. So it's vital for deterrence, and right now we're betting against it.
Thank you. Let's move this on. So let's assume that we can get some level of agreement, right? The Strategic Defence Review lands, and we're going to do this, right? And AI is going to play these roles, and we're going to implement it in this way. And as Rupert already mentioned, there's quite a lot of challenges of actually making anything happen in this context, with the data challenge and so on. When you think about what we need to do as a nation, that can be in government, industry, academia, across boundaries, with allies, however you want to think about it, what do you think is like what do you think the biggest enabler, the biggest intervention is that government could make at this stage to unlock the journey ahead? And what do you think is the biggest obstacle that we need to overcome? I'm going to open this up to anyone who wants to kick off.
I'll offer something, just top of my head. I think in order for us to be leading in anything, that is implying that we need to be moving more quickly than other people. And I think that one of the biggest obstacles we have in the UK is that we tend to move relatively quickly once we've got massive conviction. But up until that point, we build conviction very slowly. And I think that hasn't always been the case. I think we moved terribly quickly earlier in the 20th century. We need to somehow unblock things so we can move very, very quickly on this. In order that we can build some of the actual capabilities, the speed that we talked about and Rupert and Will both talked about, but also the mass of capability as well. That will enable us to then put in place all the assurance that we can move even more quickly in the future. So I think the biggest blocker is actually a reticence to make decisive steps now. The Strategic Defence Review is a great opportunity for us to actually say, right, we are going to move quickly. We're going to do a bit of a leapfrog now over the next 5 years, 2 years, before 2026, in order to really make up the ground that we haven't been taking. I think so. That to me is the biggest blocker. There's an opportunity here as well, though. The UK stands at an interesting intersection point, particularly in Europe, where we punch above our weight in defence, always have done. We've got great ambition in defence. We've got great people in defence. We've also got a very, very strong AI industry. It's a great opportunity for us to put these two things together. And actually, and really start to lead properly.
And there's some language coming out of government now about kind of the convergence of the prosperity agenda and the security agenda. I mean, is that something people think is a way forward on this? Who else wants to come in?
I mean, that was what we did in the integrated review in 2021. So by putting the science superpower agenda as the first chapter in our international strategy, the fundamental underpinning idea was the idea that automation, robotics and AI reduce companies and countries' dependency on people to create wealth, that is to manufacture or to provide services, and equally to scale their armed forces to deter or fight. It was like the fundamental underpinning principle. Prosperity flows through that because, again, being able to outthink your competitors in industry is just as important as being able to outperform them and outthink them as a state. So winning in AI is crucial for our future prosperity and security, and also presents really profound risks when you have models that are smarter than us. Like, we haven't touched on the AI doom debate, but we should. People regard it as science fiction, and yet we're walking into that world. Most people's estimates for the chances that an AI smarter than all of us kills all of us are ranging from sort of 5% to 40%. When the Manhattan Project was running, they said, well, look, if we get above a 0.003% chance that we kill everybody, we should probably stop the Manhattan Project. And yet here we are. So I think, on the one hand, there are some profound things the UK has to do if it wants to win in this space, but the AI Safety Institute and the work led under the previous government to really engage with the risk of AI doom was really important and needs prioritising.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think to Keith's point that UK defence is at the moment betting against AI. I suspect the department would challenge that, but I don't disagree with you. But the point is, they're not knowingly betting against it. They think they are leaning into AI, but the reality is, for government, and particularly in this case for defence, they find this sort of thing exceptionally difficult. As we've heard from Will already, defence is full of really good people, and we're hugely lucky to have them. But they find it very, very hard. So the last I heard, that defence had something like 400 different AI initiatives. Yet it doesn't seem to add up to very much. And that is because it is hugely difficult to bring in something like AI across the enterprise of UK defence, which is why Will and I at the start both talked a little bit about the back office. Because actually in the back office, you can learn from other organisations more readily. How different is defence in the back office from the financial sector, for sake of argument? There's a huge amount of industries who are doing great things with AI, building huge efficiency into their system, where defence could learn from those entities. Now, if defence did that, a number of things happen. First, you begin to build some confidence, and confidence is really important. You build an AI baseline that you can then grow from, and critically, you begin to free up money, because AI gives you huge efficiency, takes humans out of the loop, frees up money, and there's one thing we need in UK defence right now, it's to free up some money so we can modernise the front end. So for me, the thing they need to do is take a bit of a deep breath, stop going off the shiny toy, which is about killing things, and come to the back end. And that's countercultural to me. I spent my whole career on the front line, but actually come to the back office first and begin to build some confidence from which you can grow from.
Rupert, how long do you build the confidence for? How long do you focus on the back office solely? Do we have time to do that? And at the same time deter...
No, and I think that's a really fair point. And look, I'm exaggerating for a fact. You don't do it solely. Of course you don't. But I think what you've got to do is bring more discipline into where you are trying to introduce AI closer towards the front end. Because again, that in itself, as you know, builds confidence.
So it's not an either or.
Agreed.
Yeah, Will.
Yeah, when I speak to military officers, about AI, I think I often see a slightly confused face on the other side of the table, the sort of briefing room, and there's a slight. You see sort of panic descend when they've kind of made an assertion, perhaps about something they've seen in a briefing paper by some of their staff, and they're terrified, perhaps, that you might get into a back and forth on some of the technical details of one level down from whatever was in that paragraph in their briefing paper. And this is incredibly unfair, by the way. So there's also some very technical military officers out there. But basically, I think one of the big problems here, and one of the things that can be changed, I think, is particularly in the UK, is that there's this wave of change is moving so fast. Corporates are able to take risks in ways that defence can't, because there's some of that's for ethical reasons and for a whole bunch of sensible reasons. And so actually corporates and the private sector's learning a whole load of lessons here about how you can make use of AI across your enterprise in a way that defence is really struggling to, and they'd like to, but they just can't. And part of that is, and that's because of the change is happening so quickly, and it's because it's a bottom-fed organisation, and you've got people moving up. So a big thing that could be changed, I think, would be more rotation between defence and the private sector. This is often like something that's exactly criticised, by the way, as like a revolving door. I think actually the door kind of needs to revolve faster, really. I think at this point to try and get the experience moving around. And then that would lead to my sort of final point here, which is I think if the customer can basically know what they want, then they can be really opinionated about what big bets does the UK need to make, like for its sovereign capability, for its capability within the UK, and what could be assured and what can just be taken from the open market. But I think quite often I don't see them really knowing what they want yet and building that conviction.
Or how to do it sometimes, right? So I want to take a big bet that's going to create this effect, but where do I need to intervene to create that effect? We're back to people in a way, again, people's experience and skills. The revolving door has been quite a contained revolving door. There's not many people going in and out of AI entrepreneurship into defence at the moment, I think we've got quite a long way to go on that. I'm going to move this on to Q&A. If anyone wants to make any final comment on this little discussion here, make it now. But otherwise, could I ask the organisers to put this Slido QR up on the screen, please? We've got some questions coming through, so they must have done it earlier, I think. Okay. Okay, this is let's do provocative, shall we? If war in the future is the fastest robots and AI winning and soldiers not dying, why not just settle disputes with football or some other games?
I would suggest that war is not war until humans are suffering. I think that this idea of drones on drones removing the possibility of war is unlikely. You're simply delaying the inevitable. Rupert, we were talking before this, weren't we? The character of war might have changed, but the inherent what war is and how countries can impose their will on other countries, I think does not change that much.
Okay. Does anyone have a counter view to that, or?
No, except to say, wouldn't it be lovely, if you could have a football match, but you can't because there's got to be jeopardy.
Right.
And so Will and I could be at war, but we can't just have this kind of battle going on between us, between bits of AI, drones, or whatever it might be, because at some point I'm trying to get my bit of technology, not to just hurt his AI in the middle. I want to hurt Will. So at some point I've got to reach to him. My technology's got to beat his technology to then ultimately hurt Will, because that's where the jeopardy comes from. War is a clash of wills, and I think it's a really, what Keith raises is a fascinating conversation about at what point humans are out of the loop, arguably, less in the loop, but ultimately you are still trying to influence populations, political decision makers, militaries.
Keith?
Can I pick up where Rupert ended rather than where you started, if that's okay? So war is absolutely politics by other means. It's about persuading an individual to do something different to that which they did before. Thomas Schelling's famous line that war's only purpose unless sport or revenge must be to influence somebody's decision, to coerce his decision or choice. Okay, that's true. So if that's true, unless your war is a war of extermination, the point is not to hurt Will, it's to convince Will that if he doesn't do what you want, you are going to hurt him or something that he cares about. The median estimate for AGI we've already talked about. The median estimate for ASI, artificial superintelligence, one that includes robotics, witness the incredible progress in robotics at the moment, is 18 months after we get to AGI. If a robot outperforms us in proprioception, our sense of ourselves in space and time, in dexterity, which right now is really difficult for machines, and locomotion, things that we find easy but machines find hard, but at which progress is similarly exponential, there's no role for humans on the battlefield. And when your machines finish fighting, one side has won, and it's like it'd be no different to having a human army that had won on the battlefield and can now menace your mainland. The point then is that you have no choice but to surrender or face a war of extermination. There are many ways in which you can be hurt. So I don't think it is inevitable that humans have to be on the battlefield. I don't think that changes the nature of war. The nature of war, exactly as everybody said, is the same. It's the aim is to get people to do something different to that which they did before. Okay. The last thing on this idea of why do people need to fight at all? I have written about this. It was a big digression, but in Beyond the Geo, on the way in which we're already seeing games like War Thunder be used at trade fairs to try to help sell tanks to the other, to show the performance of our tanks versus somebody else's tanks. I do think things like that will become increasingly like the dances to deter that are used in animal conflicts and so forth. So it's a big digression which we probably shouldn't go down, but I do think it will play a really big role.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to another question and try and bring some other voices in on this. How do we defeat a peer adversary who has equivalent like AI technical capability, but without the morality of the bounds that we put around our use of it, importantly, the human in the loop arguments? Maybe Elke, could you come at that one?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say so many things about all the ideas that have been bounced around here. So I really want to get us back to the reality of the capabilities so far. At 2026, I think this is not right? So if you think about the reliability of ChatGPT, and I can tell you that because I've just been marking student essays, the reliability and capability of ChatGPT is not very high. There's a high error rate. Obviously, we all know about the hallucinations. Whenever I speak to AI engineers, they will tell me that even AI agents, right? The latest rage is AI agents. Everybody's going to use AI agents in the future. He told me the other day he wouldn't use an AI agent to book a holiday, right? Because it would inevitably go wrong. So this wildly optimistic view that is being presented very often for our immediate future with AI also in warfare, I think we have to be quite careful to conjure something up that then cannot be met. And I think, when we talk about challenges, including for the strategic review, the AI hype is part of the challenge as well, right? So I'm much more comforted by this idea of let's build a back office, because some of the things AI is good at will only be related to efficiency, scale, and speed, and other things it will not be very useful for. So technology has its way to find its uses in shaping our practices and ways, but it is not a panacea for absolutely everything, and I think that is really important. So let's look at the studies that have come out as to the reliability, as to what is actually forecast, as to what is really a great use of this technology, and where to hold off a little bit. And I'm also a little bit cautious with the sense of urgency that is always created in that sense.
Thank you. That's absolutely great. I'm going to come to Keith and then Will, but first I'm going to read out a question, Keith, which is pointed towards you but builds on what's just been said. Has Keith used ChatGPT? I think we know the answer to that. It's terrible at core tasks like programming. I would like to know what axes the graphs are when he says straight lines on graphs.
Okay, well, I won't go through all of them now, it's a whole presentation, but as an example, Moore's law, which has completely transformed our world, is a doubling of processing power every 2 years. Currently, AI is improving in its efficiency by somewhere between 9 and 900 times a year, depending on the task that we apply it to. Over the last 3 years, we've seen a 4,000x improvement in models. Every time we set a benchmark where we say AI will never, it exceeds it. If there is anyone in this room that wants to take the bet that AI will never book a holiday more efficiently and effective than them, I will take that bet at any amount you want. Likewise, if you want to bet that it will never write a better essay than your students, it would do it now if they were using GPT-0 Pro, no question. It's not a debatable thing anymore. These things are benchmarks. In January, they released humanity's last exam. It was put together by some of the world's leading academics, designed to be some of the hardest tests. I suggest that none of us in here would get more than one question right at best, and if we did, it would take months of collaboration with others. Within 3 weeks of that being released, AI was performing at a 28% on that benchmark, and even the people that came up with it said they think it will be exceeded in a year. This idea that AI will never is always a bet against it. It's not true. The hallucinations point's got lots of nods in the audience. As ever, we're reasoning from where AI was, not where AI is. Hallucinations have been reduced almost to zero. They will never be entirely zero. The current models cannot be zero. But also remember what hallucinations are. They are very confident statements made based on a probabilistic estimate. Humans do that constantly all the time. Your benchmarking is not perfect reasoning, because humans don't have that either. It's does it reason better than humans? So. And lastly, I do want to say this, 'cause the median estimate of 2026 is not my estimate. Like the best way of understanding uncertainty is to take the median estimate of a crowd forecast. The median estimate of the world's largest crowd forecasting site is currently 2026. Most AI leaders that are close to this say that their best coder will be an AI long before the end of 2026, and most of those that are close to it think it will come sooner. Not all. I don't want to mislead, not all. There are some who have much longer timelines. But the median estimate, so it's not mine, it's the median global estimate for when we get there.
Very clear position, and we've heard, we've brought you a bit of excitement and potential conflict on the stage here, right? I know Will wanted to say something. I'm going to quickly ask you, Will, if you...
I suppose very quickly. I think one of the original questions was, how can we deal with adversaries who aren't bound by the same constraints that we have? And I think this is a critical part to actually solving the problem. If you are actually defending and serving a liberal democratic society, then you need to do things in a way that is worthy of the trust that society puts in you, and that will be a constraint. And so it's just important that the way we build these tools maintains that trust over time. And I think the nature of this conversation and by some of the things that keep coming up in these sorts of conversations, I think shows that as an industry we need to do more there and do better.
Thank you. We are out of time. We got through 45 minutes really quickly. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much to this excellent panel. If you could give them your appreciation.